was a charity thing where you could pay to join this game so he could kill you. Like, the whole thing was how Tracy Hickman was going to kill your character. And so everybody goes in knowing that their character is going to die, and they pay for this experience. Yeah. I don't think he does it anymore. But yeah, for many years.
I got drowned in a vat of dwarven ale by it.
What's that?
I got drowned in a vat of dwarven ale.
In a vat of what? I'm sorry.
Dwarven ale.
Oh, dwarven ale. Well, there are worse ways to go.
Not if you're an elf.
There you go. Actually, it's time. We can talk after. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and those people somewhere in between. My name is David Boop, and I am your de facto moderator. I am a Denver-based author and editor, and I have lots of stuff. But for this particular panel, which is called Fish Out of Water, I'm going to focus on one specific thing, and that is Midnight at the Well of Souls, written by Jack Chalker, which is the ultimate fish out of water sci-fi book. I wrote the introduction for the Legacy edition, and I have an anthology of new Well World stories coming out, featuring authors like Catherine Asaro, S.P. Sumtao, and many more that'll be coming out later this year. But that's enough about me. Let's talk about these wonderful people who are still here at this convention. So, God, perseverance, all of them. So, we'll start and go down the row.
Hi, my name is Isabelle Hardesty. I'm a YA fantasy writer. I'm based in Atlanta, originally from Miami. And I have books here, basically with many of my characters, a fish out of water, and this one literally is a sea witch out of water. And I'm happy to be here.
I'm Travis Stepper, aka Shirtaloon. I write a series called He Who Fights with Monsters, and just that series. So I definitely don't advise your first series being like a dozen plus books long, or you will never ever get it. Like, it's great to write, but it's, a lot.
Hi, I'm Sarah J. Sover. I write comedic fantasy, Double Cross on the Bridge, about drunk trolls pulling heist, and the urban fantasy series, Fractured Fae, Fairy Godmother, about a fairy godmother hunting down the serial killer who offered her first princess. As far as fish out of water, mine's probably a little less literal than some of the ones here. But I've never really fit in anywhere, really until I discovered cons. So all of my characters kind of have that feeling of not fitting in or being out of their element, just as a default.
I'm Lynn Spencer. I write, this is my most recent book. It's the Elf Home book, and all my characters end up someplace else where they are vastly out of their normal life. And myself, I've moved around, and currently I'm in Hawaii. And that was a lot of, you do what? When it came to what was standard.
All right. So, let's just start off as we usually do when these type of panels. It's just kind of a definition. Like, in your mind, when you hear fish out of water, what kind of things do you know that the character is going to go through? Why is it called a fish out of water, and what do you think that character is going to go through? And we'll just start and go down.
I think a lot of it is self-imposed limitations, thinking that you have to fit in, number one, and then the terror of realizing you don't fit in. For Jade's awakening, she gets dropped off at a convention. Jade gets dropped off at a convention like Dragon Con, and her mom says, "Don't hurt anyone this time." She's left with a suppression pill, so she does not turn into a supernatural. Her mom's supernatural, her father's supernatural, but they just hide it. So for her, she ends up shifting into a dragon and flying off into the night. That her first evening there. So I think it's about finding out that we're all connected, and that which you fear ends up being your path.
Yeah, I reckon a genre that has a lot of like very extreme culture shock elements. It tends to be like full-blown magical dimensional displacement. So what I like to explore is exploring the elements of culture shock that are heightened but still relatable. So it's magic and all that stuff, but it's still that very universal experience of being placed somewhere where everything seems strange, and those elements where you encounter familiarity can really stand out as oddities.
Yeah, when I think of fish out of water, I'm thinking you're getting pulled out of your comfort zone. And whenever that happens, there's going to be character growth. So there's a lot of character arcs to figure out, who am I in this new environment? And I'm so out of my element here that you almost get a chance to, it's exciting because there's going to be growth, there's going to be change, there's going to be parts of your personality that you didn't even realize were there, and inner strength and things like that. So it's a lot of fun to help the characters navigate through some of those kind of situations.
I think that fish out of water is just a whole lot of, coming across things where things are not the same as you expect. And I like using it a lot because it kind of makes you think about what is your normal life. I one time had somebody complain that, across America we have the big boxes, all the United States is the same, and I'm like, McDonald's in New England, they have the lobster roll. In Hawaii, they serve you Spam and rice and give you chopsticks. You really have to see how everybody is different, and until you kind of get slapped around with a whole lot of different, you don't really notice the little changes.
Often one of our first explorations when we're early readers into the idea of the fish out of water, if, for example, you haven't moved around as much as some of us have, is the portal fantasy, right? We look at portal fantasy is a genre of fish out of water. And starting with you, sir, you remember, what was your first fish out of water? Was it a portal fantasy thing, and what do you remember about it?
What was my first one that I read? Oh God, I don't even remember.
Or it could be something you saw too.
Yeah, there's anime, for example, uses this trope a very large amount. Whether it's a literal or the very common trope of getting cleaned up by a truck and waking up in
Right, the isekai, which is popular right now. That's what I write, so obviously there's the influence there. I think everyone takes very different approaches to it. I'm not writing anything even remotely similar to Yankee on this court or to Alice in Wonderland. Right. Which are two really good examples.
Yeah.
Early, portal, fish out of water kind of stories.
Yeah, but I think what drew me to it from those other stories is always the excitement of the culture clash. Especially when it comes to sort of a blending of not exactly genre but tone. So you can take a genre like high fantasy or Arthurian fantasy, and then you can insert modern sensibilities into it, or whatever the sensibilities of your protagonist are, as they're inserted into that culture. And what really excites me about it is sort of exploring where those clashes and where it's taking. One of my original ideas was basically taking a high fantasy and then just shoving Crocodile Dundee into it.
Well, it's not a sword. This is a sword.
I'm currently reading Kindred by Octavia Butler, and in terms of portals, the book starts off where I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but she's missing a limb. And so then she goes back in time and talk about a fish out of water.
Right.
It's pretty intense. So yeah, so it's not as much fascination as, oh wow, when and where am I? So she has to deal with that, and as the reader, so do I. So it is a fascinating thing.
I know I'm wearing the Alice in Wonderland shirt because
Oh.
I thought it would be applicable to this panel.
Rock on.
But Narnia, of course, was like, that was my
Yeah.
first, like, and I think you can probably see some of that influence in my creatures. And, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was absolutely my first book of fantasy, hands down. And I would actually argue that a little bit that The Secret Garden has a little bit of that too.
Yeah,
Because I don't know, when I reread it as an adult, it didn't feel that way as much. But when I was a kid, it felt like she was going into this whole world that was private and hers and alive, and she was helping it become alive. And that was really the book that got me hooked into reading as a young child. I'd read that with my mom.
Very good.
So I think that even though, like I said, I'm probably the least literal as far as the fish out of water concept goes, but I think it's all just so ingrained that it just kind of is a part of your characters.
Actually, I think it was War of the Oaks, Emma Cole, and then Finder and all the ones that followed, which is based in the United States, but there's the gray zone where the two mix with the elf and the fae and everything, and it influenced me so much I wrote my own. So that was a big thing for me.
Very good.
Has everybody here traveled a lot? Because I moved every 3 years growing up too, and I heard you talking, and I'm wondering if that's a part of why we do this.
So yeah, we moved
sorry.
a few times when I was young, but my mom and I traveled the country a lot in the car. So I've been around many different cultures and things like that. And definitely, you know, I started in the New England area, traveled down south a lot, ended up spending my adolescence in the Midwest, then in my adulthood in the West. So, you know, now I'm going to the Pacific Northwest because I feel like, you know, it completes the journey for me, right? I want to die on the opposite coast I was born in, you know, some sort of thing. So yeah, I'm sure that people who travel are able to make use of some of that experience, but also people who maybe are stuck dream about that experience, right? You know, I've met a lot of people who have never moved from, you know, like within a 25-mile radius of where they were born, but that doesn't mean they don't like think about it and dream about it and stuff, and you know, I'm sure that's inspirational as well. What do you guys think? Do you think that, and we'll start with you. So yeah, we'll start down there with Gwen. Do you think that the dreamers who don't travel versus the travelers?
Well, I have to say I spent the first 20 or 30 years of my life in Pittsburgh, and just 20 miles from where my grandmother was born on the farm that my father died on. We've been there for generations and generations, you know, like 150 years in the same place. And I kind of thought, I know the world. And then I had to move as an adult. And I think it was because I was never exposed to anything new, and everybody around me had been stuck in one place too. When I finally did start moving, it was a whole lot more striking than if I had moved my entire life.
Want to comment?
I moved every 3 years. I started in Virginia. I was born in Virginia. I'm from Detroit. I lived in London for 3 years, Florida for 3 years.
Did you say London?
Yeah.
So talk about, you know, the ultimate move. You're not even just moving out in your country, you're moving out of your country, right? And did that play into some of the, say, inspiration for stuff you've written and so forth?
I'm sure. I had a hard time over there. I was 8 years old when I moved, and the kids were not kind. So I struggled over there a lot socially, but wouldn't trade it for anything because, like, it was so exciting, and added to my worldview a lot. So I wouldn't be who I am without those experiences, and I wouldn't be writing the books I am without them, I'm sure. And none of my books are like one lane, they're all like a whole bunch of different things merged. So I think that's probably.
Okay. And one of the ones I'm surprised nobody mentioned was, of course, The Wizard of Oz, which is a real big fish out of water kind of story that for a lot of people is an early exposure to it, whether it be the books or the movie or whatever. And one of the things that like Dorothy, I always thought was kind of weird was, you know, yeah, she's like this ultimately good person, right? But then we look at other portal fantasies or other fish out of water stories where maybe you're not traveling alone, such as like Narnia or whatever, where you get to this other world and the paths diverge, right? That this world offers so many different things than our own that some people take the path of the light and some people take the path of the dark. Do you think stories like that, where there are more options, more yellow brick roads than just one, make for more fascinating stories? Or do you think that a single POV where everybody just makes good choices is still fun and adventurous?
Definitely, when you go into multiple realities, I think it's very freeing. In the beginning, at first, maybe when I saw something like that or read about it, it made me think, well, is this possible? But then you just kind of relax, relate and release, and realize that it is. And sometimes some of those episodes, if you're watching, can be a little bit difficult to watch, but then later on you understand it. So yeah, I like multiple realities. I like the gray area, definitely.
Yeah, Sarah was saying something earlier about being a fish out of water is a catalyst for character growth, and I think this ties into that very much so, where there's an ability to reinvent yourself when you find yourself in a whole new environment. And I think the exploration of that is one of the best things about this kind of story. So if you've got multiple POVs, then you can follow those, but also I think it comes down to the kind of story. Like Wizard of Oz is a very specific kind of story. It's for younger audiences. There's like morality aspects to it. It's very much a lesson kind of story, because, you know, the people she's meeting along the way, she's acting as a catalyst for them to self-actualize. And I think, yeah, that's one of the key elements of it is ultimately these fish out of water stories are about characters of fish out of water, so their character growth is where it all stems from.
Yeah, I think when you have multiple characters, then you can also take that when you're looking at that character growth and you have two different characters who are responding in different ways to the situation, they can be foils for each other, or a whole group, or whatever. So I think it does help to sometimes have more, but also, I mean, I think there's benefits either way. I mean, if you have one that you're kind of sticking with, and the reader is very is very connected to and identifying with, then you're kind of bringing the reader along their path. But it's easier to take more of a bird's eye view if you have a whole group, because you can see more how the influences are directly affecting them, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Wendell?
The first book of my series, I start out with one point of view, and then add a second one for the second book, and then two more, and a few more, and a few more, and it was really just me wanting to explore the world I'd set up, and the one person just didn't get to all the corners and the nooks and the crannies. And so with the multiple point of view, I could send them to different places and experience the world in a different way.
Very good. So one of the things we see played up a lot in these fish out of water stories, and you kind of mentioned it when you were talking a little bit about London, is fear of the other, right? And this is something that, of course, is hugely in the news and everything these days, is the idea of fear of the other, you know. And so when we explore the idea of fear of the other in these fish out of water stories, whether it be, you know, you are the fish out of, you know, you're feeling like the fish out of water, or you're seeing maybe through somebody else that's experiencing it or whatever. And what are the things that you feel that are important, the guidelines that you kind of follow to make sure that that this fear doesn't overwhelm your protagonist? We'll start with you, sir.
Yeah, I think because it's such an like with, especially when it's a fantastic setting, it's key to ground that in you know, authentic experiences. So in terms of not getting overwhelmed by it, Mark Twain, who said the best cure for ignorance is travel?
What's that? Say that one more time.
Was it Mark Twain who said the best cure for ignorance is travel?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, and I think leaning into that,
Right.
making it about that learning experience, making it so you can have, like, someone stumbles into a world where everything is an other, and then just have that opportunity for learning. And I think the openness to change is really key to not overindulging in that, looking everything through an exoticism lens.
Right.
One show that I loved, my husband started it and I jumped into it. Battlestar Galactica dealt with that so beautifully in terms of the other, the silence, and I loved how everything was perfect and it was them. I believe I was here at DragonCon watching some of the actors talk about it, how they didn't see the script. So they were basically thinking, so I'm human and I'm gonna go there, and they're like, what? And then it was revealed that that actor who had been playing a human being for so many years was actually a Cylon. And even the actors had issues with that, because they were like, what? So when you realize that you are the other, I think it's beautiful. I'm from Miami, born and raised. I lived in New York for about 8 years. Walking in the garment district, I almost got hit in the head with a bolt of fabric, and someone was like, yo, you gotta look out here. And I was like, okay. Literally, I was like, that person, like, I almost died. Okay. Walking, you know, yes, I, walk in the middle of the street. I still do it here at DragonCon, because I learned in New York how to look at the driver, connect with them in a soul way. I don't do this, everybody, please don't. Cross the street and get on the other side and go, I'm alive. But it doesn't always work out for everybody. But it's a New York thing. I learned how to live there, thrive there. But originally, so then I became one, I guess, when I was there. But you have to realize that the other is you. And I absolutely love stories when it's proven that that which you fear, you become, you are already it.
Yeah, I deal with it a lot because I actually have various people, you know, doing you're the other, I don't want to deal with. And I tend to do a lot of found family, so they overcome that sense of other by actually working through their differences and making a new kind of culture which is blended, where they get over the fear of others.
And I mean I think that fear can be, people respond differently to fear. People respond differently to being in different situations. So, like, for example, in this book, the way that she's a fish out of water is that she's been raised her whole life by the Sealy Royals, and she knows she doesn't want anything to do with that life. So she's become a fairy godmother. but she's still living as a Sealy fairy in Boston. And until later on, when she has to pay more attention to the unseelie and the courtless, and even some of the older different deities and other cultures. There's so many of them that fall under the Fae umbrella. She still doesn't. She kind of has to take her place in making a change for everybody, and she's not comfortable even in her own skin. And she's terrified. She would never ever admit to anybody that she's afraid of anything. But so she's resistant to changing, and she's clinging on to this image of herself as she's hunting a serial killer. She's like, no, I don't care about this. I don't care about this. I don't care about this. We're just gonna hunt down this bastard and make him pay. And then in book 2, everything just comes back to, it crushes her almost. But without her found family, you made a great point about the found family. Without the found family, she probably would have been crushed. So, I mean, I think that's an integral part of that character development is, dealing with that fear.
Okay. One more question, then let's see if the audience has some questions. Let's talk about another form of the fish out of water story, and that is the time travel story. Whether it's moving forward in time or backwards in time, we've certainly seen this done a lot in fiction, in movies, and so forth. And when we're talking about time travel, sometimes we're sending people to very dark periods in our past, right? What was the movie recently that they did that, where somebody went back to the just before the Civil War or something like that. God, it's stuck in my brain now. But yeah, there are dangerous times to be traveling to. It's not all going to be fun and Renaissance and things like that. So when you're looking at the idea of dropping your fish out of water into an era where, say, women don't have rights, POC people do not have rights, children are used as property, and so forth. Very, very dangerous things that we've hopefully tried to move away from, sometimes not as well as others. But how do you deal with some of those issues when it comes to the fish out of water, where literally they have no way to really change the way people are without changing history? Start with when.
Well, this is interesting because I was just reading an isekai where the girl gets dropped back into time to one of the warring states and ends up being hooked up with one of the generals that eventually does unify Japan. And she was a history buff that had botanist training and all sorts of things. And she doesn't give a damn about the future, and she just changes things right and left. And I was sitting here the whole time going, I don't really find this somehow, it doesn't seem right. That one person can decide for an entire world, I'm going to wipe everything out. When she came from a very peaceful Japan, where there's very little hunger, there's very little war in Japan. There was nothing really to change in her time, and she had no idea what impact. And she was just thinking, for me to stay alive, I've got to increase crop in production. I've got to introduce this harvesting plant. I've got to teach them how to wash their hands so we can reduce the, and I'm thinking, you're going to ripple out and change the entire world, and time is not going to go the way, and you have no idea what the impact was. So as a reader, I was slightly, and I think though half of it is I'm 60 and this was a 16-year-old girl, and I'm like, think beyond yourself, woman.
Go back down this way.
Time travel hurts my head. I don't write it because I don't want to deal with paradoxes and all the butterfly effects and all that kind of stuff. I did find I have finally gotten around to watching Doctor Who.
Okay.
Like, yay! Finally, it has taken me a long, long time to get
Thus
there.
the blue hair, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly. That was
yeah,
exactly
that's
what
your
it
TARDIS.
was. Yep. But the episode where the idea that there were certain like spots that you can't mess with,
Right.
and there was an episode where he said, "Screw it, I'm going to save this woman anyway," and he took that power and he saved the scientist and brought her back to Earth. And then she was smarter than he was, and she killed herself because she said this is not how it was supposed to be. And right, spoilers for a show that but I don't know. I feel like a lot of the reason that we, when we do time travel, a lot of the reason that we make it so that we can't change the future is because it changes what we know from our perspective as storytellers. And it's like, well, how do you go back and then fix that? And I know a lot of shows and movies and books and everything have tackled that, but it's not going to be me.
Yeah, time travel is a difficult one because there are so many issues around the mechanics of it. Like, so many different stories are approached in so many different ways. There's no, like, some try to be really hard science about it. Others treat it as, basically a handy tool for telling the story they want. And yeah, that's another reason I also don't engage in time travel for that reason. But I think much of the same issues translate however your fish out of water happens, whether it's time travel, whether it's an alternate universe. As writers, we're the ones who set the rules. And yeah, with time travel, that's often okay. So the rules we choose to set are the rules of the time period and the place in which we choose for our time displacement. So it's always about choices and however we go about it. It just comes down to engaging with those difficulties, because it's just as easy to go to an alternate reality where, women or men or people of colour or whatever are deprived of rights or in a privileged position. And I think that's part of the fun of writing stories like this, is in exploring how we engage with them. So, yeah, it's less of a challenge than I think an opportunity.
One of the things that I get frustrated with the isekais is how many authors have decided, wouldn't it be great for the guy to have a whole harem of girls with slave collars on?
Right.
And it is just a huge track of these people, and I'm like, of all the choices you could pick, I understand the male fantasy, but half your audience, half the world is female, and
Yeah.
I don't like that message.
That could be an entire other town.
Burning Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Burning Shakespeare from A.J. Hartley.
Okay.
Everybody needs to read that if you're into some well done time travel. That's all. I'm sorry.
No worries. For me, I do have a little bit of time travel that I'm working on in one of my new books. Viola the Vampire Witch. She's born in the 1800s and gets turned into a vampire witch on New Year's Eve, 1907. So, in terms of time traveling and her reality, I kind of make the story begin where she wakes up in South Beach and she thinks that she works in a mall and she needs her inhaler. And the two supernaturals are like, yeah, you're good. She's like, I need my inhaler. But she actually wanted that slumber spell to kind of avoid some of the bad moments where she was just like, I'm a new vampire, it's early 1900s, I'm going for it. So she did things, and then she eventually did slumber spells, and now she's the new hunter witch, and she's finally stepping into her responsibility. So I think the word responsibility just popped up. We do what we want as writers, as people. People do things. However, I think that I personally don't want to read everything. And if I'm reading, for example, Kindred by Octavia Butler, she's dealing with things with love and respect. And yeah, I don't necessarily want to read a book where it's like, and he has a woman to choose for the evening of 15. You know, I understand, you can set parameters, but, you know, I guess that's what it is, you know, the life and mind of a creator. And as readers, we have choices.
So the movie I was trying to think of was called Antebellum, with a woman who goes back to the slavery era. A black woman goes back to the slavery era and what she has to do to try and get out of it. You know, one of the worst times. And I also think about the TV series Russian Doll, where in season 2 she ends up having to go back in time to World War II Germany, and she's Jewish and stuff like that. So yeah, there are some definitely some fish out of water stories where it's not just that they're awkward, but the world itself has already determined that that person is the lowest form of life, and everything in that world is trying to extinguish them. And they actually call it Antebellum a horror film, which, you know, even though it's time travel or time fantasy or portal fantasy or whatever, the fact that what this woman endures is clearly horror. And yeah, so, all right, is our mic on? And start taking some questions about fish out of water stories. Oh no, you're fine. All right.
Okay, specifically to the panel, as you were all talking about the fish out of water and them changing for good or evil, I was wondering if you had considered writing or have read a story where your fish out of water in one place becomes the hero, but then literally goes someplace else, whether it's another world through another portal or just another city, and becomes the absolute villain because of what they've gone through in the first one. Showed up as neutral, became loving, and then realized, oh, these people suck. I'm just gonna rule over you. And then, or vice versa, and changed and gone back. And what do you think of that idea?
Well, the big trend in isekai right now is people who jump into a story that they know or a situation they know where they're basically the villain. And sometimes they embrace it and go, boo, ha, 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 I'll go ahead and rule the world. And sometimes they're like, I'll be nice and change the world to what I want it to be. And usually with the idea of, I get to survive the horrible ending, usually comes to the villain. And sometimes they can't change. And all the spectrums are there within the genre. It's an interesting exploration, whether or not fate is something you can change or not.
And not as clear of an example as what you're talking about, and not literature, which I don't have literature track, but Resident Alien. Have you watched it yet?
Yeah, Resident Alien is a really good example.
Okay, it's comedy. It's Alan Tudyk, and he's an alien on Earth, and he is trying to acclimate. And there's a ton of examples of different characters, not just him, who are fish out of water that are sometimes in a good way and sometimes in a bad way, and it's definitely worth watching. You're welcome.
The one that's not an exact example of what you're talking about, but one of my favorite book series of all times is The Four Lords of the Diamond by Jack Chalker. And if you need, I can give you more information on it. But it's a 4-book series, Four Lords of the Diamond, and basically the futures version of a James Bond super spy has been sent by his galactic government because these 4 planets have decided to rebel and leave the Empire, and they're each led by a different warlord, and the James Bond super spy needs to be sent to these worlds to rise up through the ranks and overthrow the warlords so they can come back to the Empire. To do this, they create 4 clones, one for each of the worlds of the super spy, while the original sits back and watches. And the planets change each one of the super spies in such dramatic ways, both not just physically, but just their whole view of the world and everything. And then you have this final part of the last book where the original is looking at 4 different versions of himself and not able to recognize anything that was him in any of the 4. And then they all convince him of why these planets left and then things get interesting. So yeah, so Four Lords of the Diamond by Jack L. Chalker is a very interesting twist on that idea. But they're all four of them are a fish out of water story. No.
Kind of leads into what I was going to ask actually. So there's a certain allure to reading fish out of water stories, whether they be portal fantasies or others. And a huge part of it, at least for me, is that in the beginning of the story, there's a bit of trepidation, but also wonder of this new place, this new time, these new experiences. But the problem is, as someone grows as a writer, they continue onwards, they explore the world, they start to know it, and then us as readers start to know it as well, losing a bit of the magic. Not necessarily in a bad way, because it's usually replaced by other things. But is there a way to keep that initial magic ongoing in any sort of tale? I guess my closest example is not actually a novel. It would be like The Good Place, which just kept changing locations in most seasons or situations. But for novels specifically, is there a way to capture the magic of visiting another world? And even though you get to explore it, to keep that magic throughout?
I just can't stop thinking.
Good question.
That's a great question, but I'm looking at some Star Trek out there, I think. Yeah, about, it reminds me, the first thing that came to it is a new planet, let's go down. Whether a person's taken away, an obstacle, that'd be great, right? Taken away, or invited, or just walking through something as a portal and going, I'll just be back, I'm gonna go to the refrigerator, and then coming into like a Mars or another planet. So yeah, that's a good observation. For my book, I make it so she's stuck out of Bellefleur on purpose, kind of to reignite things. Then she goes back, but now there's a new sense and new obstacles. Yes, you have to keep it exciting, and we find ways to make it exciting though. But yes, not just with character and plot, but we do change things with locations as well.
Yeah, one of the things that triggers, it's not quite fish out of water, is the Zanst series, where unfortunately the author started to repeat the formula. They go see Murphy, and Murphy always forces them through 3 sets of challenges that really doesn't matter. It's just, let's see how smart the hero is, and it ends up repeating. And I think the real key to keep it interesting is every time you change point of view, the story has to change drastically. They're not in the same situations. They don't meet the same people. They explore a different area. Don't retread anything you've set up already.
Yeah, layers of discovery. Keep discovering things about either move slowly with the discovering and keep adding different elements to the world that they're learning, or keep putting them in new situations. I'm reading Touching Color Carl right now, so keep going down a level, go down those stairs, it'll be all new all again.
Yeah, I think, it's about layering the environment in which the character or characters find themselves. So it has enough depth that there is always like that next layer of discovery. But also you can cycle things around so that they go back to places they've been before after having changed in various ways. Yeah, so when you go full circle and you come back and it feels fresh again because of the vastness of how different their perspective is in approaching all the elements that they did previously.
One of the other elements that sometimes people use for this kind of thing is introducing a new character that, like a new person crosses through whatever, the portal, through time or whatever, otherwise known as the Brady Bunch Oscar effect. When all the Brady Bunch kids got too old to be kids anymore, they adopted a new kid to kind of stir things up. Not to necessarily, good results, but sometimes it can be done well. So, thank you.
That's a great question.
So my question is one that I think you guys have kind of already answered, but just indirectly. But it is the question of purpose, giving your character a goal to go for outside of, oh my God, the chosen one has arrived, or your house dropped on the evil witch, you are our savior. It sounds like everyone has written characters that go to different places and have a reason a goal to strive for outside of simple prophecy. But for, say, the aspiring author who might be struggling with finding that purpose that isn't just pure chance related or pure, again, prophecy related, what advice can you give?
I mentioned this in other panels. There's a book by Deborah Dixon called Goal, Motivation, and Conflict. It's very good. It's on Amazon or wherever you want to buy it from. That's very helpful. It helps you know that there are layers to what that character needs and the characters around them.
Can you say that book again and the author, please?
Deborah Dixon, Goal, Motivation, and Conflict.
Okay.
Yeah, because that really is it. It's about finding like the core motivations, not just the specific needs of a moment, but the underlying motivations that define character, and then applying them to the circumstances in which they find themselves.
In my first book of the series, at the end, the character was faced with the goal being, do I stay here or do I go back to Earth where everybody's human and I don't have to deal with all these elves and everything's going on? And that was one of the key pivotal points at the end was, you know, do I have enough here to keep me founded? And I think that's the kind of thing that you're looking for is, do I go back to where I'm comfortable, or do I stay with this fish out of water situation? Have I learned enough to want to stay here, or go back to comfortable? And whether or not that's just, you know, go back east, or not embrace the culture that you found yourself in, or whatever. There's always a, you know, do you stay or do you go?
One of my favorite fish out of water stories is a novel. It's a solo novel. It's not a series. Called The Glory Lane by Alan D. Foster. Has anybody ever read that? Okay, I got one. And one of the interesting things about it is these three college-age kids end up getting caught up in this galactic thing, and they're taken from the Earth, and they're on the run through many, many, you know, galaxies and planets and things of that nature. And each one of the three has a different motivation, right? One's looking for his place, one wants to go back to where he was, and one just wants to shop. And some planets have the best shopping. And so, so you look at this as almost archetypes of what you're just asking. You know, it's some people do want to find their place in the place that they've landed. Some want to go home, and some just want to make the best of it, and whatever happens either way, they're going to be fine.
Yeah, I think everybody has kind of said the same thing, which is well-developed characters. I find that once I know my character, the first time I write the book, I don't really know them yet. So I layer on because I'm a pessimist. But anyway, once I get to the end of the first time I write my story, I feel like that character comes to life inside of my head, and then I go back through and I'm like, is every choice organic? Is this how this person would actually act in this situation? And once you get to know them on a deeper level, it doesn't seem like you kind of get stuck in that way anymore. You know what I mean?
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Good question, sir.
So culture shock's a big part of a lot of these stories. What are some of your considerations for building authentic feeling culture in a setting that's usually or often has magical elements and things like that?
Magic is another variable. It's just another part. I see it as part of the ecosystem. I have a bio degree, so that's probably why. You know, I mean, just think about the needs and desires of your, you know, at the individualistic level, at the community level of your, you know, fantasy race or whatever you are, and think about how those are met by the environment around them and the connections that they make and what those driving forces as an animal they have.
Yeah, cultures are, you know, driven and shaped by, you know, various forces. You know, be that physics, biology, climate, and adding magic, yeah, it just adds more variables. So, like when I'm approaching world building, I use a very question-based approach. Like, you know, whenever I introduce an element, my first question is, what does this do to the society? And then, you know, the questions get more and more specific until I've got a fully fleshed out world.
Theme often directs you. I often pick up a theme where I'm trying to actually address something that bothers me about our world. And so the character, the theme is tied, their whole story is kind of tied. I don't come blaring out, you know, this is horrible, you know, but, you know, I put them down that path and let them see all the aspects of it, and it kind of is just it's the path of the story is dictated by what I'm trying to expose in our own world.
That's interesting. I come from the complete opposite angle on that.
Yeah, everybody's different.
Yeah, I come to it with like characters and development, and my book, The Witch of Bellfleur, is set in South Florida. I'm from Florida, so I just started in the swamps, and then magic's there, but it's not number one. It's the relationship between the people / entities, and then it all works out.
I'm trying to find the quote now. I can't get a signal here to get the quote. But the kind of the paraphrase of a quote I was told one time was, we believe in gods and magic as something that has happened in the past or to other people, whereas Native Americans believe their gods and magic exist today. You know, that they see their magic, they feel their magic, they still use their magic, and they still believe in their gods, and their gods are active and walking around with us at all times. And again, I don't have that quote exactly right, so don't quote me on it. But the idea that a culture can have a completely different view of things like gods and magic and so forth in amongst, you know, others that have absolutely opposite views, or, you know, or like on the panel, these two don't agree at all. So, but you know, that plays into your fish out of water story, because it's like, who are the people, who are the found family, who are the mentors, who are that your character is going to find, and what are their beliefs versus what other cultures within the same area believe, right? One of the weaknesses of the Star Wars series is like every planet has just one ecosystem, right? Every planet has just one faith or something of that nature. Even Star Trek, unfortunately, this happens to a lot, right? Where you go down and it's the entire planet is, you know, a military planet or a commercial planet or whatever, right? Our world is not made up of one thing, right? So when you're looking at cultures, it is not enough to just make one culture. You have to build the cultures around it that might spring up. People who vehemently disagree, and then look who rises to power, and then which ones might be trampled down, and say, here's the cracks in my story. Here are the holes where my character can fall into, right? And that's where good storytelling comes from. is finding those cracks, finding those holes, and saying, what if? Right? Thank you.
Thank you.
I was thinking about it in The Matrix. Neo is kind of the ultimate out of fish out of water. He's experienced a whole new thing. He ultimately is the savior figure. He gets to the end and realizes he's lived that same life over and over and over, and he always ends up in the same place. In Groundhog Day, you've got a character who is living within his own life the same day over and over and over. Both characters are faced with these decisions about how they respond to that. What are your thoughts about, in these kind of stories, free will, manipulation from outside sources, destiny, as to the course that they take?
Again, I'm going to go back to Battlestar Galactica. Have you seen the end? Have you seen the just look at the ends. Any ends? Right?
Until the last season.
What, sorry?
I said until the last season.
Okay, go back and watch the last bit. But anyway, they talk about that without. Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I think it's kind of freeing sometimes. It's also limiting, but the limiting and the freeing part is that if we could do this again, I'd be here today, right now.
I think that pretty much answered it. Go on up.
Okay, so it seems that the ideas of trauma and colonization are interesting themes in fish out of water stories. I was thinking about Planet of the Apes, Charlton Heston, where there's this inversion of previously being a dominant culture to now being oppressed. And I was wondering what your thoughts are of fish out of water stories dealing with this real history, well, not necessarily directly real history, but of Indigenous people being pushed out of lands, the experience of needing to go into a new culture, that there seems to be a way of negotiating trauma in this fish out of story, as well as that kind of OP-MC power fantasy that underpins it.
Well, there's a couple of things to break down there. Let's talk about the idea of the power switch, right? And it could be as simple as, a matriarchy versus a patriarchy, right? And whether a man suddenly ends up on a planet that's ruled by women, and that is like classic kind of Robert E. Howard sort of stuff and things like that, where these kind of things happen. But what do you think about that shift in the power dynamic? Anybody want to comment on that?
I like power dynamic shifts. I like seeing ruling classes pushed aside. I do it a lot in my writing. It's gratifying.
I also like to explore the power dynamics of any given situation. And fish out of water stories are one of the best ways in which to do so, because it's, taking fresh eyes on a culture that, not just the culture they're going into, but it also gives them a fresh perspective on the culture they're coming from.
And then the other half of that was not just like, a switch of power dynamic, but an entire kind of rewriting of history, what we often call alternate history. And we look at Man in the High Tower, right? Or High Castle, Man in the High Castle, where we look at this idea of, the Nazis winning the war and things of that nature, where an entire, not just power dynamic, but a world shift, and your character ends up there.
That was difficult for me to watch personally.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. That's a very good concept, and I like it when the main character is someone that you don't expect it to be. So let's say the shift happens, right? And let's say it's someone else there that is not even part of the two groups. It could be so many different ways to do it. It could be someone observing it from another time, even, or an alien observing it from the future going, oh, hello, humans. You're up to this place. Okay. Who knows? But there's so many options and possibilities.
Thoughts about, Cro-Magnons or dinosaurs, still being raised into the positive level. Neanderthals and that raised into the peak of evolution. Any thoughts?
Well, the thing I keep on, it doesn't really quite fit in, but when the volcano started to erupt on my island, the natives were all, locals were all, Pele, she's gonna come through, the best you can do is clean the house, welcome her in, and walk away. And the people that have moved there recently and built $1 million homes right in the lava field, we're doing the, no, we can get the military in and bomb the volcano. And that will change the course of the lava. And the scientists were like, no, what part of volcano are you not understanding? And that really, we're circling around that event in my mind, and I'm like, yeah.
That explains a lot about Atlantis. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much. A big round of applause for my panelists here. Really job. I'm sure they have swag and information about where they're going to be. And if this is your last panel of Dragon Con, I want to say thank you for coming to Dragon Con 2024. Thank you so very much.